Welcome to the Date Forever podcast. Keep your relationship fueled up with strategies discovered by couples and experts. Because at Fuel Collective, we believe better relationships will equal a better world. You are about to discover specific insights and tools that cost little or nothing to implement to help you date forever. And now, here are your hosts, a couple who always have a half-packed suitcase and a date night in the calendar, Sammy and Nathan Yeager.
Hello and welcome to Date Forever. In this week's episode, we're chatting about unconscious gender bias in relationships, unpacking your household tasks and the division of labour, and finding ways to have constructive conflict. But before we dive into that, Sammy, what's been fueling you up this week?
I had a few things this week. Lots of them were about my hobbies and interests.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, I got a road bike. Yeah, I think I've shared on the show that one of my goals for 2022 is to compete in a triathlon. I say compete, I mean complete. Like it might be a race, but my race is just against me. And Finish it. Yeah, so I'm going to do a sprint distance. So it's not a full length one, but it's like a good introductory length. So you need to swim, ride and run. So investing in a road bike is a very big commitment to making that goal happen. And on the weekend, I took that road bike out with my beautiful husband. And I did for the first time, did quite a number of kilometers on the bike and then got off and ran. That doesn't sound like a big deal, but like it was. On fatigued legs. So I'm in the beginning stage of training and that felt really good. I also had my last ceramics class in the little course that I've been doing. So it was nice to see a few of my things come to like almost to fruition. They're at the last stage. I have to go back and pick them up in a couple weeks' time. But, you know, I can see what it is that I've created over the last few weeks, which is really cool. And then the other thing that really fueled me up was we did a few little tweaks around the apartment over the weekend. That might be your fuel up. What was your fuel up?
No, mine was closer to your first one. So I finally signed up to the bike race that I want to do later this year. And it was very much a case of when you sign up for the marathon, you start training. So as soon as I signed up for the bike race, it was like the next day or something, or 2 days later that I was like, oh, I actually need to start training. So yeah, dusted off the bike, gave it a clean and yeah, got out there a couple of times last week.
That's so reflective of commitment. Like when you've actually committed, not, oh, yeah, I think I might maybe
do this thing sometime in the future. But when you actually commit, sign up.
Skin in the game.
Yep. Paid the money, registered, committed to it, and doing it.
Yeah, I think that's like anything. Once you really commit, once you go all in, then you like, it's happening. Success loves a deadline.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. That's definitely what happened this week. But now, here's this week's guest.
Today we've got Sharon Costanzo joining us. She is a coach, podcast host, and founder of Respected and Connected, a coaching program that helps women create secure, give-and-take relationships that don't need to shy away from conflict. Sharon is known for her practical and drama-free approach to the common conflicts and challenges that people face in their closest relationships. Welcome to the show, Sharon.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Hey, take us way back. How or why did you become a coach?
I think, like so many coaches, my own experiences with life is what led me to become a coach. And even before I met my husband, I went to school to become an engineer. So I'm an engineer by my background. My educational background is in engineering, and I grew up with all boys in my family. So I'm the only girl in a family full of boys. I worked in a really male-dominated environment, and I felt like I'm this very confident, capable woman. And when I married my husband, he seemed to be cool with that, my confident and assertiveness. And as we started kind of just going through that first part of our marriage, I felt a lot of pressure to kind of fulfill a lot of these traditional roles as a wife. And I wasn't quite sure how to navigate that. It wasn't exactly what I wanted. And pushing back on that a little bit was creating a lot of conflict in my marriage. So figuring out how to renegotiate some of those expectations in my marriage caused a lot of stress for us for a long time. We saw 6 or 7 therapists in the first 7 years of our marriage, and we never really seemed to get to the heart of the issue. And a lot of the stuff that I was studying on my own, trying to figure out how to communicate without just getting sucked into these dead-end conflicts, figuring that out for myself was really what started my journey to coaching and to doing the work that I do now as a coach.
Oh, wow. So give us some context and some timeline. How long have you been married now?
So I've been married for 10 years now.
Okay, so about 3 years ago, you were like, I've figured it out.
Yeah, I would say there were definitely little moments along the way when I was like, okay, I put this piece together now. This doesn't work. This is something that, I always felt like was off a little bit. And just putting all of those pieces together. And then, it was about 3 years ago that it was like, okay, we're in a good spot. I feel like I can bring anything up with him and we're going to get through it. And it's not going to cause more problems in our marriage than it's going to address.
Yeah. Can I ask, so talking about like gender kind of roles and the husband role and the wife role, the things that have like typically been modeled to us or shown to us in media, our hierarchical structures, our parents, our grandparents. Had you had many conversations about those kind of things with your partner before you either got engaged or even got married?
That is a good question. I don't think that we specifically talked about those things as much as we should have. The thing that happened with us was I was working as an engineer at the time, and he was as well. We met at work, and he was the first guy that I ever met and started dating that didn't seem intimidated by my accomplishment and also had like his own thing going for him. Prior to meeting my husband, it either seemed like the men that I was dating were really turned off by my professional accomplishments, or they were kind of looking for someone to take care of them. So I really did make some assumptions based on the fact that my husband, he knew I made more money than him. He wasn't turned off by it. We knew each other at work, and he was really cool and comfortable with me at work. And I just assumed a lot based on those impressions that I had. And we kind of had a fairly short courtship and engagement. We got married fairly quickly because we had some family situations. We had some family members getting deployed, some family members living overseas. Everyone was together and we were like, let's just get married. So we did some of that like exploration with each other after our wedding, which is never advisable, but it's how it happened for us.
It's how it went.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So I guess what were some of the core conversations that you think that you probably should have had before getting married?
Yeah, well, I think definitely we didn't talk about finances as much as we should have. I was definitely more financially established than he was. And we didn't really get into his financial situation as much as we should have. Honestly, he and I are pretty much on the same page as far as finances go. He's not extravagant. He might be more of a spender than me, but he's not super extravagant. But finances, what people's roles are going to be, how much housework are we each going to be expected to do? Who's going to do what when the kids come along? Like, how do you feel like loved and cared for as a spouse? What makes you feel that way? It was interesting because our courtship and engagement was so short. I didn't spend a whole lot of time with all of his family. And I never saw his mom and stepdad together until we've been married for a year. We went and visited them, and I was like, oh, this makes so much sense.
This makes sense.
What he expects from me makes so much sense, or what he would like from me makes so much sense now that I see them together. So some of those things.
So take us back to like the early stage of that first 7 years. What were some of the things that you were like hitting conflict about? Like was it specific things like who's doing the food shopping and who's cooking dinner and doing the dishes and our laundry? Like, was it all sort of like domestic tasks type stuff or bigger than that?
It was definitely a lot of domestic tasks. It was about 2.5 years after we were married that we had our first child. And that was really when I would say the shit hit the fan, so to speak. We had a child and I was still working, and what I expected from him was not what he was automatically willing to do. So I was the one getting up with the baby all the time. I was doing the lion's share of all of the housework. If the baby needed anything, if I didn't specifically ask for him to do something, then it was on me to do it. He was spending a lot of time in the evenings, playing video games and stuff while I was taking care of the baby. And I had become really resentful of that and trying to talk through that. And then we had an unexpected pregnancy. Right after that, our babies are just less than 18 months apart. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
So really, then we had 2 babies, and I left my job to be a stay-at-home mom when our second child was born. We had 2 kids under 2, and we had not figured out how to talk about who was doing what and how to have a more equitable sharing of household duties and childcare.
So you mentioned that you kind of went through 7 therapists and things like that in a short period of time.
Yeah.
So I guess what was the light bulb moment around kind of this sharing of household duties, or was there a methodology or something that you came across to try and realign some of these expectations or realign the duties?
We didn't really have a methodology specifically. One of the things that came up in therapy that was definitely a light bulb moment was I had kind of had this very feminist idea, like if things aren't fair with us in the household duties, that somehow I have failed to be the strong feminist that I want to be. And so I was really pushing for that. And I had this very clear idea of what I thought it should be. And I remember one therapist just saying to me, like, whatever works for the 2 of you is okay. And I was like, oh, there's no like rule that I have to follow. We can figure it out on our own. That was one light bulb. I have read the book Fair Play. I know that you guys mentioned that, I think, in one of your recent podcasts.
We've got the cards right here sitting on my desk.
Awesome. That conversation has come up a couple of times. We have never sat down and specifically hashed that out. My husband's a little bit more of he doesn't like to feel so attached to a plan, if that makes sense.
Boxed in. Yeah.
Boxed in.
For anyone who doesn't know, Eve Rodsky wrote a book called Fair Play, and it's really about reassessing the division of household labor. And she's built a deck of cards. It's around 100 different tasks that you maybe consciously and subconsciously know that you do or need to do to keep your life, your household running. And the card deck kind of creates a tool that you can use to more visually dispatch, for lack of a better term, the tasks. And for myself and Nath, I'm a super visual person. I found the process incredibly helpful. And it was like, oh, this is why I feel exhausted, because I'm carrying all of these cards. I'm carrying all of these tasks. I'm conceiving all of these things. I'm planning all of these things, and then I'm executing on all of these things. And that's no wonder why sometimes when I ask Nate to do something and he lets me down, why I feel so let down, because I asked you to do one thing in context of my deck of cards. So for us, it's been a really great tool to create more visibility around what's happening in our house to make it go. But I totally get that that's not for everyone as well.
Yeah. The thing I like about Eve Rodsky's method is what you mentioned, that the conception, planning, and execution. We do kind of follow that. If I want my husband to take something on, then I am going to pass the whole thing along to him. He's going to do all of those steps. It's not like I'm the project manager and he's just executing. He's doing all of it. That has helped a lot for us, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that Eve talks a lot about in that book is often men might feel like they are doing a lot of things like cooking dinner, but really they've taken the ingredients that were in the fridge and cooked the food, as opposed to conceiving, okay, well, what did we need to budget for? What did we shop for? When did we shop? Is it still in date? All of those things that the woman has typically done, and then the man's just done the executing part. Yeah, so I think it's a really great framework. If anyone's interested, look it up. Eve Rodsky, Fair Play. But Sharon, I wanted to go back to something that you said there about resigning from your job and stepping into full-time mum duties. You early in this interview, you've already mentioned a couple of like your work achievements, and you can totally correct me if I'm wrong, but my hypothesis is that a lot of your identity was wrapped up in your professional self. And that was would have been a huge transition to your professional self to being mum.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And it wasn't a decision that I felt totally at peace with when we made that decision. I was working in a very like male dominated, pretty toxic work environment. And just the thought of having two babies so young and trying to work in an environment that didn't really value or appreciate my skills, it just was too much for me to take on. So yes, leaving my professional job to be a stay-at-home mom was a really difficult part of that whole transition in our relationship. And my husband was in graduate school at the time as well. And so I felt a lot of like jealousy of what he was doing outside the home because I was home by myself for 60 plus hours a week doing all of those tasks that weren't really mentally stimulating.
That's a huge transition, especially for you to say, like, I wasn't really at peace with it. Like, it's no wonder then that was causing like other conflict and dis-ease in your relationship. Talk to us a little bit about like, how did you navigate that? How have you come to a place where you're like, oh, okay, that's the decision I made? Or
yeah, well, I know that it was really the best decision for me and for our family at that time. It gave me the time that I needed to focus on that very intense period of parenting. I did stay home. I was home full time for about 15 months. And then I started working at a math tutoring center, which turned out to be a really fun and rewarding job. When my baby was 15 months old, I started doing that. And then pretty soon I was running a tutoring center, and I was doing that about 25 hours a week. And that was a really helpful period of my life to be working again, to feel like my skills were valued, to feel like I was contributing outside of my home again, getting some time away from those two demanding children that really needed a lot of attention. So it was a good period of time to kind of heal some of those wounds too of what had happened in my previous professional life where things were really difficult at work. So
you mentioned obviously like engaging in third party help, working with some therapists, working with some coaches and stuff. What was the breaking point where you're like, okay, it's very clear that the two of us can't solve it. We need outside help. Like, what was it that happened? What were you experiencing that you decided it was time to escalate?
Well, like we sought outside help along the way several times, but there was one period of time, and it was around that time that I was going back to work, and we had gotten into this dynamic in my relationship where I would ask for help with something from my husband, and he would feel criticized. And the way he responded would feel really hostile towards me. And there was one time when I just said something to him, and I remember being so careful about how I brought it up because things were so tense between us, especially around housework. And I was like, hey, I know that you take the garbages out to the street on Mondays. Would you mind just going around and picking up all the garbage from the bathrooms before you do that? And he was just really hostile towards me in that moment. And I was just like, I can't take it anymore. And so I sat down with him probably within a week or so of that happening. And I said, if you are hostile to me every time I ask for help, I don't want to be married. And he was like, okay, I'm out. Like, he packed a bag and he went and slept at his dad's for a while. And I told him I don't want to leave the house when I'm taking. So we kind of swapped off. We were unofficially separated is really the best way of saying it. For a few weeks, we kept the kids at home and we just stayed somewhere else and took turns being at home with the kids. And at that time I had already, I think before I even told my husband, we can't keep doing this. I had already scheduled an appointment with a therapist, and I had been working with a therapist on my own to try and figure out some boundaries and stuff and how to communicate. And that was one really big learning point, and something that I teach my clients now is a lot of times when we start these hard conversations, people don't respond the way that we expect them to. I thought if I told him I'm so unhappy that I don't want to be married anymore, that he would be like, oh, you're right, something needs to change. We need to figure this out. But he was like, nope, see, I'm out. But what happened after that was I really did see that his initial reaction was not really how he really felt. He was willing to do the work, but he just needed some time to think about that and figure it out as we kind of navigated some of those tough things.
I think that is a really interesting thing that you brought up there, like that people do have, I guess these initial reactions and do all respond differently when conflict does arise. So like, it obviously sounds like there was the underlying kind of issues in the relationship to begin with, but it sounds like the conflict resolution and the actual conflict style was an issue as well in itself.
Yeah.
So I guess how did you kind of work through the conflict resolution side of things in your marriage?
Yeah, so learning our pattern, definitely also learning about attachment styles. I'm definitely more of an anxious attachment and he's an avoidant, which is why he was like, okay, fine, it's over. That's
the most challenging combination.
a typical avoidant style. That's what they do, they withdraw. And so understanding that and understanding also John Gottman talks about this, and I'm sure a lot of other people do as well. Like you cannot have, even Eve Rodsky talks about it in the book Fair Play as well. Like you can't have an important conversation when emotion is high and cognition is low. And because my husband and I both can get into that emotional reactive state, we just know that at that point, it's time to call a timeout and wait until we can calm ourselves down and self-soothe a little bit before we try and talk things through. And then at that point also, if we can communicate this relationship is important to me and I want to have a healthy relationship. Let's work together on how to figure it out rather than going to more of that victim villain story, trying to find the bad guy.
Yeah. I think something you said right at the beginning, like that you spent quite a lot of time like really not finding the true issue. And I think that's so common where there's like a lot of symptoms presenting themselves as like, oh, fuck you. You didn't do this thing that I asked you to do. Like, whereas like the real thing is like, oh, I'm very hurt, upset, injured, wounded, something about this totally other thing that's much bigger than you not following through on a task you said you were going to do. Nathan and I had one of these things yesterday, whereas like I had asked Nathan to do something and then he didn't do it the way that I wanted him to do it. And then when we were unpacking it, it was like, oh yeah, okay, cool. There's something here that a need of mine to actually have certainty and trust that you're going to follow through isn't being met here. Like, where did that come from? And then we got a bit more curious about, okay, that seemed like a big response to a small thing. What was I truly responding to? And I don't think that's a skill or a muscle that we, ever get taught about what does conflict look like? How do you identify if you're treating a symptom rather than the true underlying cause? So talk to us a little bit about that experience for you, because it sounds like you may have figured it out.
Yeah. So one of the things that's really helpful to look for is what Gottman calls, again, finding the dream within the conflict. Like what dream is not being fulfilled. And if you can explore that before you really agree on what the issue is, then you can, when you talk about dreams, rather than who's right and who's wrong, a lot of times you can see that what we really both want is a lot more aligned than what we're fighting about. My husband and I were fighting about chores seemed to be the big issue for so long. And what we really both wanted, I think, was to feel seen and appreciated for everything that we were doing. And when we can see that within each other, oh, he just wants to feel seen and appreciated. And he's honestly, even when he's a jerk about certain tasks, he's honestly not a deadbeat guy. He's doing a lot of really helpful things for our family. And if we can recognize that and acknowledge that, and then start talking about the issue at hand, it helps us to be a lot more collaborative with each other.
Yeah, I really like that idea. And I think that's one of the things that came out of us playing Fair Play was you could see and appreciate all the things that were on the table and the cards that everyone had picked up. And it was, really kind of that eye-opening thing to be like, oh, yeah, like we are each doing things that we're not recognizing each other for. And this is taking a lot of brain power and energy and all these things anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Just takes an opportunity.
Yeah, I had a friend the other day tell me she and her husband are like afraid to play the fair play because they're both afraid that the other person is doing a lot more than what they realize.
Yeah, it is a chance to make the invisible visible and bring it into the light. But yeah, I really liked what you said there about like at the end of the day, we just want to feel seen and appreciated for our contribution to the family network or the relationship or the household or whatever it might be. But I think that's a big thing. And I've had girlfriends in the past be like, oh, my husband, like, oh, he just wants a thank you parade for every little thing that he does. And like, I do all these things and I never get a thank you. I'm like, why don't you just both thank each other more? Like, so you don't have to have this like currency war about like, I say thank you way more than he says thank you. Like, why don't you both just commit to like, hey, thanks for taking the rubbish out. Hey, thanks for cleaning the table. Hey, thanks for doing the dishes. Hey, like, it's so nice to be thanked for those small things because there are lots of them. And it's something that I try to do very consciously when I observe things, you know, that might seem like, oh, that's Nath just contributing to our household. Why should he deserve thanks for that? But like, I practice that muscle every day of like, thank you for making me a coffee. Thank you for unpacking the dishwasher. Thank you for wiping down the sink. I never do that.
No, you don't.
But yeah, that attitude of gratitude and appreciation, like cultivate that in a relationship. I think that's a great thing to work on. We haven't mastered it, but it's definitely something we put effort in quite a few years ago and we're still building it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think that it's so easy when you feel like you're the one putting in all the effort to kind of feel like you're owed something. And that can be really harmful long term in your relationship. I think you can have conversations about that, but also, like you said, just being the change that you want to see in your relationship is really the first step.
Yeah.
So Sharon, you mentioned that bringing up the topic in the first place was probably one of the critical points in a conflict going the right way or the wrong way. So I guess what have you discovered and what's kind of the best way to try and bring up some of these hard topics with your partner?
Yeah, I think I always like to coach when I coach my clients is begin with a win-win mindset. So begin with the idea that we can figure out something that's going to work for both of us. A lot of times we come with kind of an accusatory mindset or like you have something that you need to fix. But if we could start out with this idea of we're going to figure out something that works for both of us, and I'm going to be just as open to your point of view as I hope that you're going to be to mine. There's probably something that I don't know about the situation right now. And it's my goal to first explore and understand the situation from both perspectives before we get into problem solving mode, which is not the way we usually do it. You know, we usually start with, I already know the problem. I already know what the solution is. I just need to convince you to step in line with what I'm seeing. And that is why I think a lot of these conversations don't go well because we aren't really attuned to our partner in that perspective.
So how can we do that better?
So I think one of the other tools that's really helpful is called expressing a positive need. So it's talking about what you want the result to be rather than what you want somebody to stop doing. So if, for example, you're wanting more quality time with your partner, you're wanting to have more date nights or more meaningful conversations, what we do a lot of times, because it's what we've been modeled, is you never take me out. We never talk about anything. But what you want to do instead is describe what you're looking for. Hey, remember when we first met and we were just always doing fun new things together and we were so connected during that time and conversation was really easy. I'd really like to talk about some things that we can do to get more back to that place in our relationship. Or if it's not a place that you've been before, like with housework or something, like I'd really like for us to feel like we're more on the same page with everything that's going on at home. Can we talk about some ways that we can do that? And it's much more open than I need you to start taking on these tasks or this is everything that you're doing wrong.
Are these the kind of conversations that you encourage people to schedule, or are they like just try and find the opportunity?
That's a good question. I think it can be some of both. I think often, especially at the beginning, it's good to schedule those in. And I heard you guys talking in one of your recent episodes about having like a monthly meeting. Is that how you guys do it?
Yeah, we do.
It's funny because I was just coaching earlier today. I was coaching a new mom. She's got like a 2.5-year-old and a brand new baby. And we were talking about this. And she was talking about how her husband feels kind of defensive every time she brings something up. And I said, what if you just had one time a week, 1 hour a week, where you got to talk about one issue that was really bothering you? Then you wouldn't feel like, if I don't bring this up now, I'm not going to get it addressed. You start to look at, okay, if I have just one issue that I need addressed this week, what's it going to be? The little things seem to matter less when we know that the big things are going to be handled. And so I think as you're learning these skills and you're kind of exercising these muscles for the very first time, it is nice to have it scheduled. And it is nice to know that it's going to happen. And then as you build more trust in your relationship and those conversations become more natural, you might not need that necessarily. I think it's still great to do because you're being very intentional, but it won't feel so critical to have it on the calendar as it does at first when you're learning the new skills.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think for us, it's really just about getting on the same page. That's really what the crux of the conversation's about. But it's about making sure that we're aligned in what's on for the next week, what's coming up, but then also what are some of those pain points that we want to resolve and want to find a common solution for. So.
Yeah, having a scheduled rhythm works really well for us. So we do a weekly check-in chat, generally on a Sunday afternoon, evening, that sets us up for the week ahead. And we talk about a lot of like logistical things, food, what's on the calendar, money. We do that sort of check-in, but then also like, how's our sex life? Are we getting what we want? How do you feel about your body? And then things like, is there anything you want me to apologize for? Are there any issues that came up this week that we haven't addressed? You know, how connected did you feel to me this week? Is there anything you would like to be appreciated for that I maybe haven't acknowledged? So for us, like, we can almost do that without the like agenda now because it is quite a natural conversation. But in the beginning, it was like very intentional that we like scheduled it, got out the agenda and like, yeah, worked through it methodically. But now that we have that practice, I can't really imagine not having it because it is a little like weekly check-in. And sometimes when Sunday has gone crazy and it hasn't happened, we feel it for the whole week of like, oh my God, I didn't know you were doing that. I didn't know you were doing that. I didn't like, who's doing this? And you end up having these logistics conversations all day, every day. And it's very reactive. Whereas it's a really nice practice for us to be quite intentional and proactive because you still deploy energy. It's just how you choose to do it. Time and energy. Yeah. It's just, whether or not it's before or during or sometimes after. Yeah. So Sharon, I would love to know, obviously you've been on this journey in your own relationship and your own life to come to a place where you feel like you can have these conversations with a bit more ease. What else are you doing in your marriage or in your relationship to keep it fueled up?
That's a good question. Okay, so this is the thing that it's so funny because we haven't always done this, but last fall I taught a couples course and my husband came with as a participant in the course. And we talked about some of these things, these daily and weekly rituals. And my husband is one of those people who's not super into personal development. So he gets a lot of his stuff secondhand, if that makes sense. But after that course, he started just calling me every day during lunch. And it's just a small thing, but I know that I can count on my phone to ring at 11:30 or so. And sometimes I'm on a call or something, sometimes I hit the message button, can I call you later? And then I call him back and the same thing happens. He's on a call and he says, can I call you later? But we always have that time during our day when we have just a brief conversation.
That's really beautiful. And it's probably just that thing of that you're feeling noticed and feeling seen and that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. It's a small thing, but it means a lot to both of us, I think.
I think those touch points are really interesting to talk about because for some other couples, like that would absolutely not work, right? And their thing would be like the good morning thing or the good night thing or a text somewhere or sending through a random photo. And I think it's so important to have those conversations about what does great communication look like in a normal day, in a normal week? Like, how do we want to connect? Is it totally normal for us to kiss goodbye at the start of the day and then not have any communication at all until that you both walk in the door in the evening? Or is there some other version that would be sustainable for us to do that we can both get our communication needs met? Yeah, because I know for us that's changed a lot over the years in the way that we do that, especially on days when we're apart. We now work from home together some days. Like it was yesterday, I went to send Nath a text message and I had to scroll like so far down to be like, oh, I haven't sent my husband a text message in like a week. Probably because, we've been communicating in different formats. But yeah, whereas in the past, it was definitely like touching base during the day or text messages. And it changes, our default changes when one of us is traveling as well. And I think sometimes that's not, you don't adjust to the environment because I know we've had to learn that like, hey, this is our normal rhythm. When one of us is traveling, that's not appropriate. We need to kick into traveling model.
Communication mode.
So I love that you found something that really works for you. I think that's really nice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good.
So Sharon, before we wrap up, is there one idea, thought, suggestion, tool, resource that you can recommend for couples to watch, read, listen, do to keep their relationship fueled up?
Yeah, one thing that I think is really fun, and it goes along the lines of what I talked about of checking in, is if you ask your partner at the beginning of the day something that they have planned for the day, and then in the evening you ask them how it went. It's kind of a way of saying I'm keeping track of you. And I'm thinking about you and what's going on in your life separate from me and from the family. It's just a fun little ritual, kind of like that daily check-in. Like I know he's got a meeting that's important to him or something like that we can check on at the end of the day.
Yeah, it really is all those little things, isn't it?
Mm-hmm, for sure.
Hey, Sharon, thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us a little bit about your own relationship and what's working and then also like what you're doing with your clients. To say thank you, we have provided a student in Indonesia with a week of classroom education. So thank you so much for making that possible.
Oh, thank you. I love that you guys do that.
Oh, no worries. So Sharon, if people want to connect with you or learn a little bit more about what you do, how can they do that?
So my handle everywhere, I'm just on Facebook and Instagram. I haven't journeyed into TikTok or anything yet, but on Facebook and Instagram, it's Keep Talking Revolution. And that's the name of my podcast as well, Keep Talking Revolution.
Yeah, amazing.
Awesome. And give us the 1 minute plug, tell us about your show.
So my podcast, Keep Talking Revolution, it's all about, just developing healthy communication patterns. I think so often when we have a communication challenge, people give you the advice, either blow up, suck it up, or walk away. Those are like the three main pieces of advice you get from somebody who's not like us, who's really interested in personal development and handling things in a productive way. So the theme of my podcast is all about that. How can we handle conflict in a productive way and keep the conversation going until we figure out a productive win-win solution.
Yeah, I love
Awesome.
that. That's super valuable.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks heaps for joining us. If you love what we're doing here and want more, subscribe to the Date Forever podcast to make sure you never miss an ep. Come and hang out with us and other awesome couples who are fueling up their relationships in the Thriving Couples Collective Facebook group, or check us out at fuelcollective.com.au. Until next time, keep on dating, because better relationships equal a better world.